Welcome to the Babbling podcast, the favorite podcast on the internet with your favorite host on the internet, Michael, and
your less favorite host, Rob.
we don't have our intro or outro song now, so I have to do that. Just
Yeah,
welcome.
that's just as good, I think.
I think so too. Hey,
Yeah.
before we get into this episode, I sent you the screenshot of this, but I thought it was really hilarious that somebody on one of our last episodes that we did said it was one of the most unhinged intros that they had ever seen us do. And I felt like that was the biggest compliment ever, is that it was just one of those things where it was just, we owned the name of Babbling Pastors, and it was a good 5 minutes probably. I mean, it was the episode where you said we should put timestamps in, which I still didn't do, by the way. But
yeah, it's always good when in the comments you can be called unhinged.
Yeah, well, it's better than in real life. I mean, somebody comes up and is like, by the way, you are an unhinged individual.
Yeah,
which is also true.
I think what that makes me think of is road rage or something. I don't know what unhinged in real life would be. I guess
I imagine
these days it's hard to remember what real life is. I think for a lot of folks, though,
That's true too. I don't know. When I think of unhinged, I think of 4 a.m. in a gas station off the interstate with somebody like just so disheveled, shopping for a Hostess Twinkie, and they don't know what the rest of the day looks like. But
life choices, right? All right.
Hey, I've seen a lot of life choices like that in my with my job. So, yeah. I'm just saying, if you find yourself at 4 a.m. in a gas station looking for a Twinkie, and you're not like on a very purposeful road trip, there's probably some decisions that have been made. So, I'm just telling you, given my analytical data, or I don't know. Gosh, I'm not smart. All right, so let's go into this week's episode of the Babbling Pastor podcast, where we react to things that we see on the Twitters or the X's or just the internet. Let's just say the internet. So I wanted to take a page out of your book, Rob, from last time when you were like, you threw something on me that was like, oh, this is positive. This is good. This isn't like, this isn't clickbaity rage fuel for the soul. And so maybe by the time this comes out, which this will be out rather soon, but it's not as far from Father's Day as it could be. But I came across this, and I thought this was, let me switch to the screen real quick. I thought this was a very interesting thing that we could spend a short time discussing. This is Michael Foster, I think is his name.
Yep.
And I believe he's reading this at his church on Father's Day. And I found it, fairly intriguing, a little inspiring, but let's listen to it really quick. And then I just want to talk about what is being said here is like, what can we get from it? Here we go.
Now it is Father's Day, so I have an ode to fatherhood. I don't think dads need a day. I'm not saying we shouldn't honor them, we should, but dads don't need a day. The long hours, the hard grind, we don't do that for a pat on the back. Sure, a new wallet, a new tie, a crayon scribbled card, that's nice. But we'd get by just fine without them, because there's a greater gift that we're after, and that's legacy. Legacy is that lasting echo of our labor, is what reaches into the future long after our own life ends. All good men want a godly legacy, not just a name engraved in the town square, but 10 fingers, 10 toes, running full speed towards you 10 seconds after you pull into the drive, shouting, "Daddy's home." That's the reward. Those little people, little men, little women, born from the love you share with your wife. That's what drives us. Every day with children is Father's Day. The first steps, the first time they say Jesus, the first perfect spiral, the first dance, the first time they hold their own child in their hands. Those are the gifts. The work is the reward. And that's why we grind. That's why we go out for Tylenol at 2 a.m. That's why we pick up a second job. That's why we read bedtime stories when we're falling asleep ourselves. That's why we discipline and say, no, you may not disrespect your mother. Because they are the legacy. They carry the best of us forward. And at the core, our hope is that they carry with them a love of God the Father. After all, the work Fatherhood is meant to reflect his fatherhood. God provides, so we provide. God protects, so we protect. God presides, so we preside. We've been given a mission to bring him into the world, and one of the best ways we can do that is to raise up children in the fear and admonition of the Lord. Children who raise children who raise children who love Jesus. That's the legacy. If one day our son tells our grandson, Grandpa was a hardworking man who loved Jesus, it would be worth it. Every long day, every short night, every drop of blood, sweat, and tears, not one of them would go to waste. So brothers, happy Father's Day. I hope you enjoy today, tomorrow, and the day after as you raise up your children for his glory. It's a good work you do, and your labor isn't in vain. God bless you.
Okay, so hey, a little bit of positivity to start this series of podcasts on. So one of the things here's the intrigue, and then we only have a short amount of time because these are on a time frame. We could talk about this forever, I think. One of the things that I want to pick your brain about, and I've noticed, is that, and again, if this was my full-time job, I would have so much fun researching this, but I don't have time for it. But there seems to be a tinge of like, not only so obviously Foster is talking about Christian dads, is talking about what that looks like to be a Christian dad. But I've also noticed like adjacent to this, like there is this real sense of probably guys our age, a little bit young. I mean, we're not young anymore, but younger than us, right? They're not, kids, but they're younger than us, like 25, 35. That have this real sense of like, oh, I need to be like a good dad. And I don't think it's because necessarily like their dads were bad. It's just that there's this sense of what does that look like? There's this song, or I guess it's an album maybe that somebody shared the other day called Father Figure for this guy named John Belvian or something. Anyway, the point being, the guy doesn't seem like he doesn't come off as a Christian as far as like his lyrics or things, but there is this same tinge from his music that like Foster's mentioning there, like, oh, there's this legacy that I need to leave my kids. There's this thing I need to teach them. And so have you like, as you pastor, I guess this is going to come off as an interview, but it's not, it's just a question. As you pastor, like, have you seen this same thing? Like where guys are realizing like, oh, wow, like we'll focus I guess on Christian guys specifically, but like this means something. Like this isn't just about like me going through the motions. Like there is a real thing that I need to leave my kids.
Uh, yeah. I have noticed that. However, I would argue so someone said, I'm trying to think of how it was worded. Somebody said something that was really cool the other day to me about, we were talking about something that we need to be evangelism, essentially, like getting better at evangelism in our church and growing in that. And um, a phrase that was used that was borrowed from somewhere else was the idea of preaching it into existence. And what that is talking about is if they never hear about it, they might never think about it, right? And so you begin to talk about that kind of thing when you're on that platform of whether it's a class you're teaching or preaching or whatever it might be. Um, and for our church, I don't think that maybe, maybe this is um, maybe this is something that adds to what you're talking about, like on a national scale or something. And maybe this makes it not a good question for me particularly. I don't know because in our church we talk about this.
Yeah. So yeah,
Pretty
it's like
pretty
already
regularly.
something we addressed. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I do see that, but I wouldn't necessarily link it to like a wave of something that's happening outside, even though like it could be an influence for sure. I don't know, but I do see what you're talking about. Just um, uh, in the world around us, it's being talked about more. And I mean, I think that um, we've been in other nations as well, but I'm just going to be talking about here. we have seen uh, generations at this point of different waves of feminism, right? To a point that it's come all the way full circle, so that we're confused about what gender even is, and I think part of what we're seeing is there is a group of people who, like, this isn't rocket science, right? I mean, like, at the end of the day, there are two genders. Everybody knows there are two genders, right? Everybody knows men and women are different. All of these things, right? That the world would claim, no, 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 uh, I'll be my own God. But we know that that's not true, and I think that there's even in the world, Jordan Peterson's followers, right? Like, who aren't Christians, right? There's a group of men in the world, even, and then I think especially in the church, who hear, Genesis 1:26, um, and um, I think there's a group of folks who have seen, not the feminism, because that's a lot more subtle, right? And we're so far into it at this point that we're all raised in it. We don't know anything different than what's been around us, right? Um, and what we've experienced. But I think that the craziness level of the gender confusion stuff, for a lot of people, it's like, okay, now it's become really obvious something is wrong. Something's not natural, something's not right. And men are starving, and um, for purpose, and people in the world, even secular people like Jordan Peterson, and probably other secular folks, who have a big platform, like probably a lot of the people at the Daily Wire and places like that, right? Um, have a lot of influence, and do talk about and preach, masculinity as being an important thing, and being a good dad as being an important thing. Now, we would argue, what's a good dad, right? Because for us, that would mean a godly dad, and um, and so, but yeah, I think that there is um, I see that in the church. There are several men in our church who are really young dads. There's one guy who is his wife is pregnant with their first, and we just started, um, yesterday. No, it was Wednesday evening. Was a the second class in a parenting class that one of our elders is teaching, and he and his wife came to that, like, she's pregnant with their first, right? That so uh, we're seeing we are seeing, not like I would argue that probably, like, I don't know, like a decade or so ago, maybe not even that long, maybe longer, but there was a time in the church when if you had a parenting class, it would have been mostly women showing up,
Yeah. No, yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah,
We had couples show
yeah.
up, you know?
Well, I think, like I said, I think it goes on what you're saying. So the one thing that really sparked there for me when you were talking about that was like they're looking for purpose. There's something that they're looking to
Yeah,
do. And I think part of that is this sense of like, I don't know, the guys that I talk to that are, like, so the lucky thing for me is that the place I work has kind of got like a whole spectrum of age. So we got a couple real old dudes. So their kids are, let's see, I'm gonna sound like an old dude now. I was about to say their kids are in college, which my kids go to college, so I guess I'm an old dude. But their kids are either in college or married and have kids, and like to hear them talk about like, um they're like to hear them talk about how they parented, how they grandfather now, like, one of the things Foster said is, like, one of the cool things is holding your kids, and to hear them talk about that is, like, it's just interesting to hear them sort of talk back about how, how they raise their kids, like the reflection they have on that, the advice. Like what I find really interesting is when Paul talks in Titus 2 about sort of like older believers discipling younger believers and what, the older men are supposed to teach the younger men and what the older women are supposed to teach the younger women. Like that's almost default human behavior. Paul's just saying like do that in a really purposeful way. And because these guys that are super old, they're not like purposefully trying to teach these younger guys. They're just being like, this is what I screwed up on, or this is what I did good, and like because these younger dudes, like, I mean, everybody that's had a kid knows that there's a moment or multiple moments where you go like, I just don't want to screw this kid up. Like, I just don't want to break it. And so it's one of those things where I think those older dudes that are kind of inadvertently passing that on or inadvertently giving advice is super helpful. And then you have these younger guys that like can recognize like what their dads did really well or what their dads did not so great and are trying to improve on that. And so in foster, and when I watch this thing with foster, I think, because I've said multiple times, like if I die, well, I'm gonna die, but at my funeral, I'm not I'm not immortal.
What?
When I do die, like at my funeral, if somebody can just say he loved his wife, he loved his kids, and he loved Jesus, like that's all I really want. And so, like Foster's whole point is like just like we're shooting for that legacy, and which you can what I hear when I talk to these older guys is like you can tell guys when they talk, you can tell from guys when they talk, like if they've done that well and they can sort of sit back and enjoy that, like, hey, I did what I was supposed to do. I mean, my kids aren't perfect, but like they're doing their thing and they're like balanced and living well. They know Jesus, and then you talk to guys that are like they realize they jacked it up, and so what you're like, all right, like I want to shoot for the for not the jacked up side, and um anyway, I think in Foster's whole talk, like that really comes through. One of the things I do want to talk to you about, and I know there's a point where I'll have to just cut this off because of time, but one of the things I want to talk to you about that I've noticed having a kid that's 18 now and a kid that's 8 is that there are certain things that when you're younger, I don't think I necessarily like was listening for as closely, but now I am. So for example, the church is having a revival this week, and we have my brother-in-law's kids that we're watching for a couple weeks. And what was interesting is my brother-in-law's kids don't go to church. My brother-in-law doesn't go to church at all. And so when we were leaving to go, his son, which is 7, looked and goes like, why are we going to church? Like why are we going to church on not a Sunday? And, so I had to kinda talk him through that, and he goes, "Yeah, but what's the point?" And so it was the whole like, talking him through as much as I could with the 7-year-old of well, we're going to open the Bible, we're going to learn about what God's will is for our lives, and then we're gonna apply that and live that out. Like, that's the like, as simple of a purpose as I could give him in being caught off guard like that. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting is when we got there, and then obviously before service, there was worship music. And Connor, which is my son, which is 8, I assume a lot of things about what he knows that I've noticed that he doesn't necessarily like. I assume he knows it, but he hasn't asked the question yet. And so we're in service, and there's some people that have their hands up, and he leans over, he's like, Dad, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? And I'm assuming this bro knows. Like I know we've talked about this before, or he's seen this before. But it was just one of those things that I think as a dad, specifically, there are lots of times you have opportunities to answer questions. And I don't know if I did that really well the first time around, like of really paying attention and knowing how important the answer is. That I do now. So that was a long lead up to the question for this. Like how, especially, well, I guess I'll pivot and combine these two things to your parenting class too. I know you're not teaching it, but the purpose here is like, how do we prepare parents, in this case, specifically dads, to not overlook the little things and to be like, no, I know this seems menial. I know this like is a passing question, but this is actually really important. How do we prepare dudes to do that well? Like, what would be your advice?
Yeah, well, so we are actually we're starting with uh, just a as emphasized as we can possibly make it with family worship. Um, Call it family devotions, call it whatever you'd like, right? But the idea is like I mean, we've noticed the what I was talking about earlier, that the women lead the homes so often in this world, right? And 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 men ought to. And so with that, there's I think something that I've seen is even men are, when you bring up family worship, I think the reason that quite a bit, at least in our context, a lot of that doesn't begin to happen because men are super intimidated by the thought of that. Um, because there are quite a few men who are busy working and doing life and earning a living, and their wives, not to knock on, on motherhood by any stretch. That job is, I would have killed both of our sons if I swapped with my wife. But um, so we would have to be doing this from prison. Um, but but we um, a lot of guys, especially up here, that have these long oil field sort of shifts or whatever, they have less time to be in like studying the word heavily than their wives might, or less time for podcasts or whatever it might be, right? And so I think that there's this intimidation that happens because even if a wife is really deceived by some bad doctrine, right? For a guy that hasn't doesn't feel like he's had time to sit down and get deep into it, he feels like she knows more than me. What the heck am I going to say? What am I going to do? Right? There's this first initial intimidation factor to just start leading. And so I think the first step in that is just to like figure out where the gas pedal actually is in the first place. And family worship is where we've been starting. And I don't have one here, but well, actually I do, but it's way over there. But we have these Joel Beakey. You know who Joel Beakey is?
Yeah, yeah,
So he put out these family worship Bible guides, and what that is it's like for every single, it's this little bitty tiny book, right? And every single chapter in the Bible um, has like a paragraph, a number one, like a paragraph here that ends in like a question or thought provoking discussion starter or whatever. And there'll be like two or three things for every single chapter in the Bible. So it really is a great place to start if you're super intimidated about it, to just tell a guy, look, it's not difficult. You get your family together, you maybe pray real quick, read a chapter, and read one of these, and then if you want to talk about it or whatever. And so we're trying to teach them how to do that first. And I think when guys begin to do that, um, because in some ways, I think that's the most intimidating thing that you can jump into, is spiritually leading your family.
yeah,
Um, uh, because I think there's an inherent thing there where we just kind of go, yeah, I'm not where I need to be spiritually. So how am I going to, right? But if that's the case, there shouldn't be any pastors anywhere in the world, right? Um, and because we're all not there yet, right?
yeah. No, so two things. I think that with that, one of the things that's interesting is that even when you start doing like family devotionals, family worship, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
what you are inevitably going to run into, I'm just going to say this from experience, is that you don't think that they may be picking up anything. And here's the thing, there are going to be things that they completely. Like, they don't.
Yep.
They just do not hear it. But then there's interesting things where other things where you don't think they're listening at all, and they are picking things up. I mean, just conversely with, like, I talked about with Connor, like, what are they doing raising their hands? Like, last night we were singing through the hymns, and the bro knew the words without looking at the, like, he knew them just because we sing them all the time. And so
Yeah.
it's one of those things where I think don't be like, just my sort of last word of advice here on this episode is, as you're doing these things, like, don't judge. Like, I also have to tell youth pastors that I talk to about this a lot. Like, don't judge the, the value of the thing based on the results you immediately see in front of you. Just because they don't seem like they may be picking some of it up, just because they don't seem necessarily enthused to certain days of the week to do it. That doesn't mean there aren't results that are happening from that. Like, again, going back full circle to the foster clip, the whole point is about legacy. You're looking forward right now. Like, you may not see the fruit right now. It may not, the plant may grow very, very, very slowly, but the point is that you're doing the things that you need to do to grow the plant. And so it's one of those things that um, there are going to be equal parts discouragement and encouragement in this whole process. And I think at the end of the day, my last word for that is just like you're trusting in God's overarching plan ultimately anyway. Like, you're not the pragmatic results you see in front of your face. So that's my last word. Rob, what do you have to end the episode?
Yeah, so I want to read what I think is the, let's say, the Great Commission for fatherhood, right? And in Deuteronomy 6,
I love this.
when
I've grown to love this chapter. Yes.
yes, yeah, and Deuteronomy 6 is, it says this, um, beginning in verse 4, it says, "Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." That sounds familiar, right? "These words which I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as phylacteries between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Then it will be, when Yahweh your God brings you into the land which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you great and good cities which you did not build, and houses full of all good things which you did not fill, hewn cisterns which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you will eat and be satisfied. Then beware lest you forget Yahweh, who brought you from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." And then it goes on and talks about, like, in verse 20, "When your son asks you in the time to come, saying, what do the testimonies and the statutes and the judgments mean which Yahweh our God commanded you? Then you shall say to your son," right? And you're going to tell them what God has done, right? And so part of this is one of the reasons that we don't do children's church anymore in our church. And there are the biblical arguments for either way there, right? But there's our our children from the youngest ages can grow up in a church situation where they're 8 or 9 or 12, depending on the church or whatever, and they've never even seen mom and dad worship God on Sunday morning. And they actually learn so much more that is foundational and important from just watching parents worship the King. Um, and so I think Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning in verse 4, men, just read that, soak it in, memorize it, and do it. That's the thing. That's the whole thing. It ought to permeate your life, and if it does that, it ought to permeate your family life.
Dude, all right. There's nothing to add to that. That's great. All right. If you if you like this video going, give it a like. If you're not subscribed, I don't know what your problem is. And if you think someone might find this helpful, go ahead and share it with them. And we'll talk to you next week. See you later. Bye-bye.
Babbling pastors are on the mic.